This week, true crime takes center stage as Madison Opera presents the world premiere of Everlasting Fate by Madison composer Scott Gendel. Based on the true story of the 1897 Greenbrier Ghost, Everlasting Fate is a ghost story, a thrilling drama, and an all-American opera. Don't miss your chance to see it on February 13th and 15th in the Capitol Theater. Tickets at madisonopera.org. Our local farmers are getting ready for the growing season ahead, and now is the time to consider signing up for a CSA, or a community-supported agriculture share. A CSA share is like a subscription box to the freshest, most flavorful food your local farm has to offer. When you join a CSA, you invest in the farm at the start of the season, and in return, receive a share of the harvest throughout the growing season. Find your farm today using FairShare's interactive farm search map at csacoalition.org/farm-search. This is CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Today, the children are our future, right? Last year, a group of 15 Wisconsin kids filed a lawsuit against the state over its role in climate change. They say Wisconsin is playing an active part in worsening climate change and is causing negative physical and mental health impacts, property damage, and limits to their outdoor activities. The local Environmental Law Center, Midwest Environmental Advocates, and the national law firm Our Children's Trust represent the youth suing. Joining me today to talk about this legal effort is one of the teens in the suit themselves, Madeline Bone. Madeline, thank you so much for taking the time and right after school.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Also with me here to explain the suit is Skylar Harris of Midwest Environmental Advocates. Skylar, thanks so much for joining.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
So, Madeline, I want to start with you. Why did you want to join in this legal battle against the state?
Yeah, so climate change is something that's always been pretty central for me, I would say. I think my parents kind of raised me to be aware of my impact on the climate and sort of leaving the place better than we found it. And so joining the lawsuit was almost a natural step in that protection of the climate. I wanted to do something that would protect not only myself and the people I love, but future generations to come.
And would you describe a bit about the impact of climate change on you and your life so far?
Sure. So I'm a very big outdoorsy person. I live pretty close to the lake, and so I love to go there in the summers or just to take walks or run or bike around the city. And recently, because of the effects of climate change, I haven't been able to do that as much. So my asthma has flared up pretty badly with pollen or like seasonal allergies and the really bad wildfires that we had a couple of summers back now. And so those things have limited my ability to spend time outside and to enjoy my time outside.
Yeah, I mean, the wildfire smoke was so impactful and surprising to many of us here. And I'm also curious in terms of saying that you were brought up to think about climate and our impacts on it, seeing other actors maybe not taking those same considerations might have you with climate anxiety, something a lot of folks are talking about.
Yeah, I would say the climate anxiety has definitely been quite strong for me. I feel sort of a responsibility to not only act for myself, but also to make up for some other people's like lack of action or for the lack of action in past generations, whether because of differing priorities or because there wasn't enough good education out there about what was happening to the climate.
Well, Skylar, I want to bring you in to help unpack the specifics of the case we're talking about. And just to say, Madeline, thank you for sharing. And I'm excited to hear more from you as well. Like, it's just a brave thing to do. And this is a great opportunity to hear about it. Skylar, can you share a little bit more about the case? I understand that it's been filed against both the state legislature and the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin. What exactly are y'all arguing, and what are you hoping to achieve on behalf of these young folks?
Yeah, so I'll break this up into a couple of things. First, I'll talk about the statutes that we're challenging. So there are two sets of statutes at issue here. both relating to actions that are taken or not taken by the Public Service Commission, or as I'll typically refer to them as the PSC. So the first law prohibits the PSC from considering air emissions when issuing what are called certificates of public convenience and necessity. So those certificates are necessary whenever utilities want to construct new infrastructure within the state. And that's all infrastructure, whether it be renewable or fossil fuel-based infrastructure. So by prohibiting the PSC from considering air emissions, that means that they cannot consider things like greenhouse gas emissions, which means that they cannot consider climate change. So although climate change isn't explicitly stated in the law, the downstream impacts of that word choice does prohibit the PSC from considering climate change. And the PSC has noted that in several of their recent decisions permitting fossil fuel fired power plants across the state. So we are hoping to strike that statute down to give the PSC the ability to consider climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, and other air emissions going forward. And then the second set of statutes relates to what is known as Wisconsin's renewable portfolio standards. And those set the standards for how renewable energy is brought into the state by utilities. So here in Wisconsin, we have a 10% threshold amount set for renewable energy. And what that does is it basically says that utilities have to get at least 10% of their energy from renewable resources. So for the utilities, this acts as a floor. So they have to hit that 10% threshold, but they can choose to go above it if they want to. For the PSC, however, it acts as a ceiling. So once the utilities hit that 10% threshold, the PSC cannot require them to go any higher than that. Mind you, this 10% threshold was met back in 2013. So for the past now 13 years, we've been incredibly stagnant in terms of the amount of renewable energy generation that the PSC has been allowed to require utilities to construct, which means that ultimately more than 75% of Wisconsin's energy is coming from fossil fuel-based resources. And that only exacerbates the harms that are happening to the plaintiffs in this case. So that's the statutes we're challenging. We are challenging them under several constitutional provisions. The first is Article 1, Section 1 of the Wisconsin Constitution. And the second is Article 9, Section 1 of the Wisconsin Constitution, otherwise known as the Public Trust Doctrine. Article 1, Section 1 guarantees us certain inherent rights, which include but are not limited to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We argue that Article 1, Section 1 should also include the right to a stable climate, as well as the right to use and enjoy the navigable waters of the state. Because without a stable climate, we don't have the right to life because of the ways that climate change is impacting everyone's health and putting us in physical danger in many ways. And then our Article 9 claims are regarding the Public Trust Doctrine. And the Public Trust Doctrine basically says that the Wisconsin State Legislature has to hold the navigable waters of the state in trust for the access, use, and enjoyment of the citizens of Wisconsin. So basically, we are arguing that because of these limitations that the legislature has placed on the PSC, they are failing to protect our navigable waters and then therefore hindering our ability to access, use, and enjoy those waters. So those are our claims. I know that was very long.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite something to hear the arguments that are being made, and something that's standing out to me is that the state in these policies are preventing climate change from being combated. So it's an active thing. So saying that the state is actually actively causing harm to these plaintiffs. Am I hearing that correctly? That versus like the state's not doing enough, actually they're actively harming is the argument.
Yes, that's exactly correct.
Well, so Skylar, your firm took this case. What made you all believe that the case has legs? And do you have any sense of its chances for success? You laid out, the pathway. What made you believe that this could go somewhere?
Well, first and foremost, the national organization that we're partnered with in this case, known as Our Children's Trust, they have done these cases in several states across the United States, and they are also taking some cases international, and they have seen success in recent years. So last year, they had two really significant victories. I guess we're in the beginning of 2026, so I should say in 2024, they had very significant victories. One being in the state of Montana in a case known as Held v. Montana. And that case, very similarly, was based on state constitutional claims, and it was challenging fossil fuel policies proliferated by the state. And in that case, the Montana Supreme Court found that those fossil fuel policies violated their plaintiffs' rights to a stable climate system. And then the second case happened in Hawaii, and it was against the Hawaii Department of Transportation because the transportation sector in Hawaii is the largest emitter of fossil fuels. And that was actually the first constitutional climate settlement in which the Hawaii DOT agreed to completely decarbonize its transportation sector by 2045. So those were major victories that OCT really wants to build on here in this case. We think it has legs because we have seen the Supreme Court of Wisconsin specifically be very open to interpreting the words of Article 1, Section 1, and really determining what the meaning of the terms life and liberty and pursuit of happiness are, and what the other fundamental rights, not enumerated, but that could be potentially contained within that article are. So we are really hopeful that if this case goes up to the Supreme Court, that they would really be willing to listen to arguments that say a stable climate is inherent to the right to life, because really that is based in science. That's not a policy choice. That's just fact. So we really think that the court would be open to that. Of course, there are changes to the makeup of courts and the makeup of legislatures all the time. And we, of course, can make our best arguments, but we cannot determine what the court is going to do. So it is really open at this point, but we do have hope based on the current makeup of the court that they'd be open to listening to our arguments here.
Yeah, I was curious, like, how historic is this case? I haven't heard about many other cases like this, but these recent cases have really set the scene that this could be a possibility. And am I understanding this correctly? This hasn't been tried in Wisconsin yet, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Well, I want to bring you, Madeline, back in. I know that legal proceedings can be pretty intimidating to be around. And how does it feel for you to be in a case like this? How are you experiencing this moment and being in this group of youth?
I would say it's really empowering, first and foremost, to be, especially because all of the plaintiffs on this case are youth. So it's kind of a support network almost that we formed where we're able to share these stories. And it's hard to hear the way that climate change has harmed some of the plaintiffs on this case, but it's also encouraging to know that I'm not alone. I would say it's a bit intimidating for sure, especially with all of the legal language, but Skylar and our other lawyers have done a great job of making sure that we understand what's happening at every step of the process and being really open to questions. And so I would say it's been a very good learning experience as well.
Yeah, it's quite the thing to stand up for your life and liberty and declare it to the whole state. It seems like something that takes some courage.
Yeah, for sure.
What sort of things are you thinking about in terms of how the case might play out? What is your ultimate goal? Depending on, cases can go any kind of way. Obviously, you're hopeful, but what do you hope comes from this with any outcome?
I mean, ultimately, the goal would be to obtain life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for myself, my generation, and the generations to come after us, whether that is through a direct legal victory or through getting people thinking about the case and bringing awareness to climate change and its impacts on youth. Either way, I think I would consider that to be a success.
I'll add to that real quick, because I know you mentioned this earlier, and because of my long explanation, it got lost. But for us, the goal with the litigation is specifically to strike down the statutes. So we are not asking for monetary compensation. We are solely asking for the court to strike down these laws as unconstitutional and to allow the PSC to consider these factors when making important decisions for our state.
Madeline's just one of the 15 kids in the suit. Skylar, who are the other young people, and what are some of the unique ways they've been impacted by Wisconsin's fossil fuel policies?
Yeah, so I'll kind of go counterclockwise around the state so I keep track of everyone. But in the Milwaukee area, we have a Native family of 4 kids who are all involved in this lawsuit, and they are really being harmed in that their access to native resources and their traditional resources, such as wild rice and sturgeon, are really being impacted by warming temperatures in that like some tribes have just not been able to harvest wild rice at all in certain years. It's impacting the production of maple syrup here in the state and a variety of other resources as well. So that's a huge draw for them. And then if you look to our more northern plaintiffs, we have Lucy Wright, who is really involved in skiing. And she is a competitive skier or has been for several years. But because of warming temperatures, especially in the winter and loss of winter snowpack, she has not been able to ski as frequently. And she actually made the choice to leave her competitive teams because they just have not been able to compete at the same level that they have been in the past. The sport has gotten more dangerous because of melted conditions. And the only way they can really practice is by traveling 2 hours to a place that makes artificial snow, which really only exacerbates the existing problems. 2 other students that live farther north or in more central Wisconsin are Ted and Charlie. They both do different kinds of agriculture. So one of them does more animal-focused agriculture, and the other does more crop-based agriculture. And they've both been impacted by things like flooding events, whether that be, loss of crops or even lack of rain events where they have had to drill wells into like the aquifers that are around their area in order to supply water to their crops, whereas they used to be able to get that from the rain. They've had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to install barns in order to house their cows in times of the year when they would usually keep them outside. And then we have another student named Bella. Her family has a like hotel cabin business up north, and they really rely on winter recreation, which, as I previously spoke about, is gradually going away. If you go to the western side of the state, you have our lead plaintiff, Karina Dunn. She has really been impacted in a variety of ways. One of the biggest ways is the physical endangerment that I mentioned. Because of the climate change driven freeze thaw cycles, her home was down the hill from a cliffside. And because of those freeze thaw cycles, a boulder actually dislodged from that cliff and crashed into their backyard. And the first time we met her, she pulled up an image of her home on Google Earth, and you could see the destruction that was just throughout her entire backyard. It probably ended 20 feet from her back door. So her family actually had to move out of their home because they were really fearing impacts of continual rock slides as well as flooding. And then another plaintiff out west is Simon. He was really engaged in Greta Thunberg's Fridays for Future campaign, and he actually had to leave his school because they were upset about the fact that he was participating in walkouts every Friday. So he's been homeschooled for a significant period of his educational lifetime. And then if you go to the southern portion of the state, you have our client, Caroline Elfstrom, who is our youngest plaintiff, and she lives in Beloit, where 2 of the largest fossil fuel-fired power plants are located. And so she's really concerned about asthma impacting her and her family, but also all the youth that live in Beloit. They have really, really high asthma rates down there. And so she has actually submitted comments to the PSC on her own behalf before. So this is an 8-year-old going in front of the Public Service Commission and expressing her concerns. And despite her complaints,
Wow.
yeah, they still permitted the expansion of fossil fuel-fired power plants in her neighborhoods, despite her and other youth getting involved. And then here in Madison, we have Madeline, we have Indy Gresh, who also struggles with asthma. We have Alex Castillo, who is a soccer player and is impacted by extreme heat. And then we have Elia, who is impacted by migraines that are exacerbated by extreme heat. I think I've hit everyone. So that is our group. So they are a really great bunch of kids, and they've done some fantastic work, even leading up to this case. And so them being part of this has only heightened what they've already done across the state.
Yeah, I mean, laying all of those out just really shows the range of impacts. And when you're talking about asthma, the health conditions, and the boulder, the impacts on life and health, these are really serious. I'm sure folks listening, hearing about the home with the family who had to move out because a boulder fell, who could have been hurt. It's startling. And, I'm thinking also that there are adults who do animal husbandry in the state and farmers who are being impacted and adults who also take part in winter sports or it is their job and work. What is it about the youth being the ones bringing this lawsuit forward that really matters here? And I want to ask this to you both. And Madeline, if you could start.
The stories of youth are powerful because everyone knows a young person and everyone wants to support the future of a young person, whether that's your own kids or just someone that you know or your friends' kids, because ultimately adults are facing the impacts of climate change already, but they are the ones who are going to have to live with the heaviest burden. And so I think putting youth at the front of the case, youth who are going to continue to suffer these climate impacts for decades to come, is really the most powerful way to lead the case.
And Skylar?
Yeah, to add to that. So first, what Madeline said is they are going to be the ones that are living with this future for the longest period of time. And so we really have to make sure that we are creating a future for them that is sustainable because they're the ones that are going to have to live with it. The second thing that's really important for us to highlight is the fact that youth's bodies are still developing. And because younger kids especially tend to consume more air per pound of body weight than adults do, they are more susceptible to intaking pollutants that are going to harm them over their entire lifespan. And then I'll also highlight something that Karina said, and I'm not going to quote her directly because it's been a minute, but she was making a point at the Wisconsin Climate March that happened here in Madison last year, where she basically said, utilities and the people who build this infrastructure, they get to profit from the poison that they put into our air, but it is the people that are paying the price. And Karina and all of the youth have to think about climate change and how it impacts their lives every single day in ways that even I, being about 10 years older than our older plaintiffs, didn't have to think about at their age. So it's really permeating every facet of their lives, and they're the ones that are paying the price. So if they're the ones that are bearing the brunt of the cost, then they should be the ones that are making the decision about how we move forward.
I remember Karina making that comment at the climate march because I walked alongside her and I kind of paused and I was like, wow, yeah, we are going to have to bear the brunt of climate change, and it's only right that we have at least as much decision-making power in this process that's going to affect our livelihoods and our future.
So Skylar, where does the case currently stand and what's next?
Yeah, so we initially filed this case back in August, and a couple months thereafter, the PSC and the legislature both filed motions to dismiss. I won't get into the full legal bases, but basically what they said was that either the courts are not the proper forum to address these concerns. These concerns should go to the legislature. Obviously, if the legislature planned to do anything about it, they would have done it, and we wouldn't have to be suing them right now. And the second thing that they would say is that the youth don't have standing to bring this case. And standing is, it's a legal term, which basically dictates who can bring a case in front of a court. And what they're arguing is that either it's not the state that's causing these harms, it's the individual utilities, and we should be suing them instead, or that these harms are so generalized over the entire population of the world that the youth in this case are not being harmed particularly enough to be able to be the ones to bring this lawsuit to the court. Obviously, we disagree with both of those contentions. And I think if, as we just discussed, the stories of all 15 youth, they are experiencing unique and extremely harmful impacts from climate change that are not common to everyone. And so we think they are, well within their rights to bring this lawsuit. And we really think that it is the court's job to hold the legislature in check and make sure that the legislature is acting in accordance with our Constitution. And we just filed a motion for a hearing. So we're still waiting to hear from the judge about whether she wants to hold that hearing, but we're hoping that it would be in person and it would give everyone who's participating in the case, all of the youth, an opportunity to be in front of the judge for the first time so that she can really put faces to the names of the people who are involved. And so she can see the people whose lives she is impacting when she makes these decisions.
So the motions to dismiss, are they out of the picture, or everything is in the balance at this moment?
So that would be what the hearing is about. So the judge at this point, she can either decide the motions based on the written materials that we've all provided up to this point, or she can decide to have this hearing, which would, be further discussion about the contents of those written arguments, as well as answering any further questions that came up for her while she was reading them. So the ball is really in her court to decide how she wants to move this particular part of the case forward.
Well, you both laid out lots of merit for the case and just appreciate you making the time. Madeline, I'm going to give you the last word here. Is there anything you want to tell other young people who might be listening, who are concerned about climate change, or share a last message, or not your last message, but a message for the old heads making decisions that impact your future?
I would encourage people, both my age and younger and older, to just think about the ways that climate change will continue to impact us, and not to forget that we do have real power. And just because we're young doesn't mean that we don't have opinions or strongly held beliefs or anxieties, or that we can't do anything. We are the ones who are going to be making the policy decisions in a couple decades, and we can start that process now. And we need to start fighting climate change today and right now.
Madeline, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
And Skylar, thanks for breaking all of this down.
Of course. Thank you for having me as well.
That's Midwest environmental advocates lawyer Skylar Harris and Madeline Bone, one of the 15 kids suing Wisconsin. That's all for today here on CityCast Madison. I'm your host, Bianca Martin. Don't forget, you can support the show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Madison neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. And if you enjoyed today's show, why not share this episode with someone who knows, as Whitney Houston so beautifully sang, that the children are our future. And if you're feeling pleased with us and the show, go review and rate CityCast Madison on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It helps other people find us and hear from the folks making an impact in our community. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until then, take good care and thanks for listening.